It's been 20 years since the president declared math forbidden. Mathematicians enemies of the state. Possession of calculators, textbooks, scantrons, all punishable offenses. In this world, one man tries to find a way to survive.
I was a math professor on sabbatical out of the country. Now, I need to get back in.
Sir, papers please.
Here you are, officer.
Doctor, huh? What do you study?
History. French history. I'm getting back from sabbatical.
Ah, très bien, monsieur. Très intéressant.
Yeah.
Any goods to declare? Food, wine, calculators?
Of course not.
Well, great. We are issuing tolls for this stop, you understand. So $1.42 for the car with 68 cents for one person. That comes to an even $2. Sorry, what was that?
210! 42 plus 68 is 110. I owe 210.
A math person. I knew it! Sir, step out of the vehicle.
Everything is connected. To learn anything, you have to build on what you already know. Whether it's science, art, or philosophy, we can connect everything to anything. So let's learn anything. Let's find those connections and let's build our intuition. Welcome to Intuition. I'm your host, Evan Noce, and this has been a very challenging episode to write. Don't get me wrong, writing these episodes, cross-checking textbooks, research articles and books, it hasn't been easy. But every time I've tried to write this particular episode, it never felt right. The concept is simple. Extending an olive branch between the math-inclined to those who never felt at home with it. Yet every argument I made, every comparison I fashioned, was inadequate. I felt I was berating those who never liked math, or beating around the bush to avoid confrontation altogether. So, I've decided to take a different approach. I'm going to tell you 3 stories. Each of these stories is fake, I invented them, but think of them as math parables, each trying to teach a mathematic principle through narrative. Imagine a time before math and numbers. A small town sat nestled in a valley. A half-day's walk from the town, an old shepherd lived with his flock of sheep. Each day, he watched over his sheep and made sure they were well fed and groomed. A neighbor lived a short distance away, and he too watched his sheep every day, though often fell asleep. The old shepherd paid constant attention to make sure each of their sheep stayed separate. Every week, he would go into town to trade for food and other goods. He would take 2 or 3 sheep into town and leave the rest at his home. One day, when he returned, he found his neighbor asleep, and their sheep mixed together. The old shepherd was furious.
You have wronged me greatly, neighbor, for now I do not know which sheep are mine and which are yours,
he said angrily. The neighbor apologized and said,
Take what you know is yours. The fault lies with me.
The shepherd's anger subsided. He sighed and began to imagine how big his herd was. With no way to keep track of his sheep, the exercise was fruitless. The old shepherd split the herd down the middle, driving half of them home. The next day, the old shepherd began fiddling idly with loose threads on his robe. Then he thought of an idea. He began to tie a knot for each sheep he saw in his flock. By the end of his labor, there was one knot for each sheep. That week, when he went into town, he untied 3 knots as he traded 3 sheep for bread. Upon his return, he again found his neighbor asleep and their herds mixed. The neighbor was ashamed.
I fear I have wronged you once more, friend. I beg your forgiveness.
But the old shepherd was not angry.
Worry not, neighbor, for I know what my herd is,
He said, raising the knots of his robe for the neighbor to see. He then pulled sheep from the herd one by one for each knot on his robe.
I can now keep watch of my herd anywhere, for I wear it.
From that day forth, the old shepherd and his neighbor tied knots for each of their herds, and no longer watched their sheep too close, for they knew they could count on which were theirs. The king of a small kingdom loved to call in artisans from across the lands to make him fine jewelry, elaborate clothes, and beautiful buildings. One day, the king called for the best bricklayer in the kingdom. A young man whose father had been a master bricklayer answered the call. Upon arriving at the castle and entering the king's chamber, the king pointed to a large rope draped across the southern wall.
See that rope?
The king said.
I want a brick wall that lines up perfectly with the curve of the rope. Not a piece of brick more, not a piece less. Do this and I will name you a master craftsman. Fail me and you will be banished from the kingdom.
The bricklayer paused. To become a master craftsman would be a great honor, but the task seemed impossible. All bricks were squares or rectangles, so how could he make the top of the wall curved? Then an idea came to him.
I accept your offer. You will have your curved wall.
The bricklayer bowed and left the king's chamber. When he returned home, he quickly began to put his plan into motion. Taking rectangular bricks, he cut the bricks down into thinner bricks, each with the exact thickness of the rope.
If the square edges are very small,
He thought.
then the rough edges will be unnoticeable to the king.
With his thin trimmed bricks in tow, the young bricklayer returned to the castle to begin the job. As he assembled the wall, though, he ran into another problem. When the thin bricks were placed so one of the corners ended in the center of the rope, there was either an empty gap beneath the rope or a bit of extra brick above the rope, both of which went against the king's wishes. He found that by placing the thin bricks exactly centered on the rope, each end was properly hidden. After much effort, the wall was completed. Looking very closely at the wall, the bricklayer could see the square edges behind the rope. But as the bricklayer backed away from the wall, the square rough edges began to fade, and a wall as curved as the rope filled his view.
A marvelous feat of craftsmanship, young man. I hereby name you a master craftsman of the kingdom.
The king was happy, and the bricklayer was just happy things went so smooth. A wealthy man lived on his massive estate in the countryside. As far as one could see, the man owned the flat, smooth grassland with mountain ranges in the far distance. The man was very particular and liked to have things his way. Each morning he had a coffee with 3 sugars at exactly 9:30 in the morning. At 10:25 he would walk around his house 3 times, and at noon he had a ham sandwich with 3 slices of ham, 3 slices of cheese, and 3 slices of bread. One day, the man read about automobile races in the daily paper, which he read at 9:30 with his coffee. He became fascinated by the fantastic machines and desired nothing more than to hold an automotive race on his own property. at 10:20 that day, he contacted his landscaper.
Could you make an automobile racetrack on my property?
The wealthy man asked.
With the size and shape of your estate, that won't be a problem.
But,
The wealthy man added,
could you make it with only 3 turns? I do love the number 3.
The landscaper had expected this much. 3 trees were planted outside the house, with 3 gardens, 3 guest houses, and 3 fountains. The landscaper saw no issue with the proposition.
I'll do it. You will have your racetrack with 3 turns.
The landscaper said as the clock read 10:25 and the wealthy man began his walk. Taking out a piece of paper, the landscaper began to design the track with 3 turns.
A triangle will do. It has 3 corners which yield a track with 3 turns. Easy enough.
The landscaper thought. To test the track, he marked out one of the corners with some fence posts and took the wealthy man's car to drive through it. Upon reaching the corner, the landscaper tried to turn the car, but the car flew outside the marked corner. The landscaper paused.
The angle was too sharp. I'll need to make the track out of right angles.
He thought. The landscaper returned to his drawing board and erased the triangle. Then he tried to make a triangle out of nothing but right angles. He began drawing and erasing over and over again. Each time he could only draw one right angle, with the other 2 corners being even steeper than before. Dejected, the landscaper looked out at the estate. The flat grassland shone brightly in the sun, with the mountain ranges behind them. Looking closely at the mountains, the landscaper thought,
Mountains curve a great deal as you climb, yet the climber cannot see that curve while he climbs it.
Quickly, the landscaper returned to his drawing. Taking the triangle he started with, he began to draw a curved line between each corner. The rounded sides met at 3 points at right angles. With glee, the landscaper got his men to work digging the path that would be the racing track. A week later, the track was finished. The wealthy man and the landscaper got into a car to test the track. From the starting line, the track looked straight, and as they sped along, the wealthy man couldn't notice any curve in the track. Finally, they got to the first corner. This time, it was much easier, and the car took the turn gracefully. Again, they sped along the straightaway, and again the wealthy man did not notice any curve in the road. Then they took the next corner, and the next corner, until finally they reached the starting line once more.
A racetrack with 3 turns! You've done it!
The wealthy man was thrilled by the landscaper's hard work and thanked him greatly, and the landscaper was just happy things turned out well. All right, 3 stories just as promised. Let's go ahead and take a break, and when we return, we'll discuss what these stories mean.
I think it is time. You are ready.
Master, are you sure? The secrets of the Cartesian scroll have been kept safe for untold generations.
Subtract those thoughts from your mind. You are the sum of your training, the integral of your surroundings, derivative of your roots. All of this converging at this real, finite moment.
Master L'Hôpital, your ruling is but a fraction of your power. I accept this scroll. It's blank.
What?
Yeah, there's nothing here. Maybe it's a sign?
That is beyond the domain of what's reasonable.
Maybe the real sum was the friends we made along the way.
Welcome back. Before the break, I told you 3 stories about a shepherd and his sheep, a bricklayer and a rounded wall, and a landscaper and a 3-turn racetrack. Each of these stories I wrote to demonstrate the logic behind a few mathematical principles. So, let's see what we learned. The first story is about counting. Without even using numbers, the shepherd found a method to count his sheep to know exactly how many sheep were his. This story is roughly based on the actual history about how we began to count and calculate goods that we owned and traded. The second and third stories are actually related to one another, and I may have pulled a bit of trickery. While the first story is about the basic concept of counting, the second and third stories are about calculus. Yes, that's right, I tricked you into learning calculus, but I swear I had good intentions. You see, when I mentioned this was a difficult script to write, it was part due to how daunting and scary higher-end math seemed. As a result, I wanted to demonstrate that anyone could learn math if it was taught a different way. I feel that we get caught up sometimes with the computation side of mathematics a bit too much. We focus a lot on numbers and following a set of steps to finding an answer with oftentimes little regard to the core of mathematics, logic, and critical thinking. The classic argument for why scientists, engineers, and physicists preferred math over English in high school is math is objective, 2 plus 2 equals 4, to anyone, anywhere. And there is some truth to that. 2 plus 2 is 4. But we are missing the why. Why are we adding? Why is the first number 2? Why is the second number 2? Why do we need this answer? If we think of math as just a set of instructions to memorize, these questions will never get answered. Think of it like learning the piano. Your teacher could only instruct you to learn scales, practice in different keys and in different octaves, running your fingers up and down the piano. In this context, there is a right and wrong answer. You could hit the wrong note or play too fast or too slow. But even if you learn to play scales perfectly, would you say you know how to play the piano? You've never played a single song. You've never put those scales to use for some purpose. You've merely followed instructions. So, no wonder most of us hate math in high school. We've only been learning scales. There's no risk, there's no purpose behind any of it. There's a reason most high-level math has little to no numbers in it. Because math is more about when and why we use a formula, and less about how we use a formula. Okay, let me step down from my soapbox. Let's get back to the two stories I told and what calculus principles we learned. The second story, about the king and the bricklayer building a curved wall, is about the fundamental theory of calculus and what's known as an integral. The bricklayer was tasked with making a curved surface from a series of flat bricks. His solution was that if you make the bricks small enough, we can approximate the curve such that at a long distance, the steps are indistinguishable from the curve. This is the crucial component of what an integral assumes. An integral adds up the area underneath a curve by creating infinitesimally small bricks that line up perfectly with the curve. We can use integrals to do things like figure out how far an object went just by keeping track of its velocity. The third story, about the landscaper and the three-turn track, was about derivatives, which are the opposite of integrals. While the bricks looked rough up close and smooth from far away in the second story, in the third story, the track looked curved from far away but straight up close. This is the key assumption that a derivative makes. It assumes that if you take any curve and zoom in very close, it can be approximated by a straight line. We can use derivatives to find the exact acceleration of an object just from tracking its velocity. If you do not consider yourself a math person and you've been able to follow up to this point, congratulations. You have learned the fundamental theory of calculus, or at least why you would use the fundamental theory of calculus. Now, why is this so important to me? Every day our computers get better and smaller and smaller. Math outside the classroom is quickly becoming less and less calculation-based and more logic and reason-based. If the barrier to people learning math is computation, we need to begin focusing more on the core of mathematics, that purpose that drives the formulas and numbers. Math is a language, and to be fluent in it means a unique way to express and interpret the world around us. Evan sighed and pushed back from his keyboard. That's the one, he thought, and was happy he had done it right this time. If you like what you heard here and want to learn more, the content of this episode comes in part from the book Number Words and Number Symbols, A Cultural History of Numbers by Carl Menninger, which you can learn more about in the description. If you would like to view a transcript or want to cite this episode, that information is also available in the description. Entuition is an independent project currently only run by myself, so if you want to hear more, please share this with your friends and family. Your support is invaluable. That means valuable, by the way.